Championship deciding collisions. Going into the 1994 Australian Grand Prix, the final race of the 1994 season, Schumacher led Damon Hill by a single point in the Drivers' Championship. Schumacher led the race from the beginning, but on lap 35 he went off track and hit the wall with his right side wheels, returning to the track at reduced speed, and with car damage, but still leading the race. At the next corner Hill attempted to pass on the inside, but Schumacher turned in sharply and they collided. Both cars were eliminated from the race and, as neither driver scored, Schumacher took the title. The race stewards judged it a racing accident and took no action against either driver, but public opinion is divided over the incident, and Schumacher was vilified in the British media. At the 1997 European Grand Prix at Jerez, the last race of the season, Schumacher led Williams' Jacques Villeneuve by 1 point in the Drivers' Championship. As Villeneuve attempted to pass Schumacher at the Drysack corner on lap 48, Schumacher turned in and the right front wheel of Schumacher's Ferrari hit the left sidebird of Villeneuve's car. Schumacher retired from the race as a result, but Villeneuve finished in third place, taking 4 points and so becoming the world champion. The race stewards did not award any penalty, but 2 weeks after the race Schumacher was disqualified from the entire 1997 Drivers' Championship after a fair disciplinary hearing found that his maneuver was an instinctive reaction and although deliberate, not made with malice or premeditation. It was a serious error. Schumacher accepted the decision and admitted having made a mistake. Schumacher's actions were widely condemned in British, German, and Italian newspapers. This made Schumacher the only driver in the history of the sport, as of 2012, to be disqualified from a Drivers' World Championship, although the McLaren team was disqualified from the 2007 Constructors' Championship and fined $100 million for illegal possession of Ferrari technical information. Team orders. Historically, team orders have always been an accepted part of Formula One. However, in the final meters of the 2002 Austrian Grand Prix, Schumacher's teammate, Rubens Barrichello, slowed his car under orders from Ferrari to allow Schumacher to pass and win the race. Although the switching of positions did not break any actual sporting or technical regulation, it angered fans and it was claimed that the team's actions showed a lack of sportsmanship and respect to the spectators. Many argued that Schumacher did not need to be given wins in only the 6th race of the season, particularly given that he had already won 4 of the previous 5 Grand Prix, and that Barrichello had dominated the race weekend up to that point. At the podium ceremony, Schumacher pushed Barrichello onto the top step, and for this disturbance, the Ferrari team incurred a $1 million fine. Later in the season, at the end of the 2002 United States Grand Prix, Schumacher slowed down within sight of the finishing line, allowing Barrichello to win by 0.011 seconds, the second closest margin in F1 history. Schumacher's explanation varied between it being him returning the favor for Austria, now that Schumacher's title was secure, or trying to engineer a dead heat, a feat derided as near impossible in a sport where timings are taken to within a thousandth of a second. The FIA subsequently banned team orders which interfere with the race result, but the ban was lifted for the 2011 season because the ruling was difficult to enforce. Dangerous driving. During his spell in Sauber, in the 1991 Sports Car World Championship, Schumacher was involved in a serious incident with Derek Warwick in that year's 430 kilometers of Nürburgring. While trying to set his flying lap in qualifying, Schumacher encountered Warwick's Jaguar on a slow lap, resulting in lost time for Schumacher. As retaliation for being in his way, Schumacher swerved the Sauber into Warwick's car, hitting the Jaguar's nose and front wheel. Enraged by the German's attitude, Warwick drove to the pits and chased a fleeing Schumacher on foot through the Sauber pits. He eventually caught up with Schumacher, and it took intervention from Jochen Mass to prevent Warwick physically assaulting Schumacher. Toward the end of the 2010 Hungarian Grand Prix, Rubens Barrichello attempted to pass Schumacher down the inside on the main straight. Schumacher closed the inside line to force Barrichello onto the outside, but Barrichello persisted on the inside at 180 miles per hour, 290 kilometers per hour, despite the close proximity of a concrete wall and Schumacher leaving him only inches to spare. Barrichello said, "It is the most dangerous thing that I have been through, and there is not a rule for that, but between ourselves we should take a line, stick to it, and that's it." Schumacher said that obviously there was space enough to go through. "We didn't touch, so I guess I just left enough space for him to come through." Ross Brawn said at the end of the day he gave him enough space. "You can argue that it was marginal, but it was just tough racing." A range of ex-drivers and commentators were highly critical of Schumacher. Although there was no accident, the race steward, the same Derek Warwick of the 1991 Nürburgring incident, wanted to black flag Schumacher since that would have shown a better example to our young drivers. The Hungaroring incident was ruled to be dangerous and Schumacher received a 10-place grid penalty for the next race. Schumacher accepted the decision and apologized. Other incidents. In 1995, Schumacher and Williams driver David Coulthard were disqualified for fuel irregularities after a switch to Renault engines and airfoils. On appeal, both drivers had their results and points reinstated, but both teams lost the points the results would normally have earned in the Constructors' Championship. The 1998 Canadian Grand Prix saw Schumacher accused of dangerous driving when his exit from the pit lane forced Heinz-Harald Frentzen off the track and into retirement. Despite receiving a 10-second penalty, Schumacher recovered and won the race. 2 laps from the finish of the 1998 British Grand Prix, Schumacher was leading the race when he was issued a stop-and-go penalty for overtaking a lapped car, Alexander was, during the early moments of a safety car period. This penalty involves going into the pit lane and stopping for 10 seconds, and the rules state that a driver must serve his penalty within 3 laps of the penalty being issued. On the 3rd lap after receiving the penalty, Schumacher turned into the pit lane to serve his penalty, but as this was the last lap of the race, and as Ferrari's pit box was located after the start-finish line, Schumacher technically finished the race before serving the penalty. The stewards initially resolved that problem by adding 10 seconds to Schumacher's race time, then later rescinded the penalty completely due to the irregularities in how the penalty had been issued. In the 1998 Belgian Grand Prix, Schumacher was involved in a race-ending collision whilst trying to lap David Coulthard in heavy spray. After the race he stormed into the McLaren garage and accused Coulthard of trying to kill him, and McLaren and Ferrari team members had to separate the drivers. Coulthard admitted some 5 years later that the accident had been his mistake. During qualifying for the 2006 Monaco Grand Prix, Schumacher set the fastest time, but stopped his car in the Rascas corner on the racing line, leaving the corner partially blocked, while his main contender for the season title, Fernando Alonso, was on his final qualifying lap. Schumacher stated that he simply locked up the wheels going into the corner and that the car then stalled while he attempted to reverse out. Alonso believed he would have been on pole if the incident had not happened, and Schumacher was stripped of pole position by the race stewards and started the race at the back of the grid. In the same qualifying session, Giancarlo Fisichella was similarly found to have blocked David Coulthard from improving his time, but Fisichella was only demoted 5 places on the grid. At the 2010 Monaco Grand Prix, the safety car was deployed after an accident involving Kieran Chandhok and Jarno Trulli, and pulled into the pits on the last lap. Schumacher passed Alonso before the finish line. Mercedes held that the combination of the race control messages safety car in this lap and track clear and the green flags and lights shown by the marshals after safety car line 1 indicated that the race was not finishing under the safety car and all drivers were free to race. This opinion appears to have been shared by the majority of the teams with cars in the top 10 positions, who also gave their drivers instructions to race to the finish line. However, an FIA investigation found Schumacher guilty of breaching safety car regulations and awarded him a 20 seconds penalty, which cost him 6 places.